Well, good morning, or if you're on East Coast, I would say good afternoon. It's 9 o'clock here in Pacific time, and welcome to your next Menopause Morning. This is a repeat from last week because unfortunately I had a technical difficulty and I did a fantastic video with no sound whatsoever. So we're going to get right into really the repeat of what last week was supposed to be, which is really the dangers of testosterone during menopause. And just kind of set this up for you. Just understanding that I've been in private practice as a naturopath since January of 2001, so more than 25 years now, and I've been working with hormones with women for over 21 years at this point. And I've looked at well over 8,000 hormone test kits in my career, and it's so interesting is that when I'm looking at a test kit of looking at a like really comprehensively what's going on hormonally with yourself as a woman, you'd probably be amazed at how often I see a not even measurable amount of testosterone. Yeah, to where it actually has it says less than DL, which means they couldn't even measure it. Doesn't mean there's no testosterone, but it's not even measurable. And this is quite common. And even if there is a measurement, usually the measurement is cautionary low to dangerously low, if not, again, not even measurable. So then you would think, based on that information, I would probably put most of these women or all of these women on testosterone. And you're going to find out the answer is no. And I'm gonna give you examples of why that is really not a fantastic idea. Right. And I'll start with one example of a woman who came into my practice. Prior to working with me, she was working with her conventional doctor, and they were, just really doing the basics as far as testing for hormones. And they were looking at estradiol, testosterone, and progesterone. That's all they were looking at. Whereas compared to when I'm doing a comprehensive 24-hour urine collection, I'm literally looking at 32 different hormones, as well as how your kidneys, your liver, inflammatory conditions, chronic disease states are all really affecting your hormones. Right. So back to this. This woman, so her doctor looked at testosterone, progesterone, and estradiol, and they were all low. This was a postmenopausal woman, so it's not shocking that they would all be low. So what happened, and this is a common reactionary state, and not just with conventional medicine, but also with a lot of holistic care doctors, is what happened is she was put on an estrogen cream, oral progesterone, and she was getting a weekly shot of testosterone. And now she felt a little bit of symptom relief, but really not the relief or the balance or the benefits she was ultimately looking for. And she was referred to myself and my clinic. Well, then she came in. And a big thing that's different too is all conventional doctors and even a lot of holistic doctors, when they're testing hormones, they're looking at blood. When you only look at blood, what I want you to understand is that you're only seeing the hormones in your blood in that moment of time when you do your blood test. And whereas when I'm doing this more comprehensively, I'm looking at a 24-hour urine collection, which gives me an understanding of what are your hormones looking like throughout a whole 24-hour period rather than just one snippet in your blood. Right, so what happens is I do the test, and the other advantage of using urine as compared to blood only shows you what's in the blood. When I do a urine collection, if there happens to be hormones built up in the tissue in the body, that's going to still show up on a urine collection. And that's, you're going to see in a bit how important that is, and not just important, potentially life-saving for you. All right. So this woman, back to our example. So she comes in. She's on an estradiol cream, an oral progesterone, and weekly testosterone shots. So she wasn't getting the results ultimately she was looking for. Somebody referred her to me, and we did this comprehensive test. Well, we get it back, and her estrogen, estradiol specifically, which is the estrogen she was taking, was off the charts high. Definitely what we would consider an estrogen dominance. And just to be, just so you have a recognition, if you're in an estrogen dominance, that is a significant risk factor for breast cancer, potentially other cancers and other chronic disease states in the body. So that was number one. Number two, her progesterone was literally off the charts. We were looking for a progesterone level about maybe like 650, and hers was over 16,000. Now, recognize that progesterone is actually utilized to lower estrogen. So, what's interesting with this is that her body was able to purposefully produce more estrogen to help lower this estradiol level, which was extremely high. But even with a progesterone of 16,000 when she should have only been like 650, she still couldn't get her estradiol low enough to eliminate that risk factor again for breast cancer and other ailments. Now, that's enough right there, just in recognizing that. But here's the kicker. Remember, she was on weekly testosterone shots. So she still had a dangerously low level of testosterone, even with weekly testosterone shots. Yeah, so it's this is what is often not understood because just to look at what goes on hormonally, let me pull up a picture here that will help us. And when we're looking at hormone production, this, because obviously, just look at the pictures. You don't want to be the frustrated, agonizing woman on the top. You want to be the happy and healthy and energetic woman on the bottom, right? And that's all tied into you getting these hormones right. So just a little quick snippet of what's going on here is that your body, as raw materials, uses a combination of B5 acetyl coenzyme A, which is a coenzyme, and cholesterol as raw materials to produce your first baseline hormone in your system called pregnenolone. And what's interesting about pregnenolone, this is the most important hormone for you. This is referred to as the mother hormone. And most people have never even heard of pregnenolone. Now, some of these other hormones you have heard of. If you go from pregnenolone straight down, pregnenolone can convert into DHEA. It can then eventually convert into testosterone, and then the testosterone will convert into estrogens. And that's the typical pathway for estrogen and testosterone. Whereas the other pathway goes from pregnenolone to progesterone, and then that can convert into cortisone and cortisol. Cortisone if you have an inflammatory condition, and cortisol if you need your primary stress response hormone. Yeah, and this all kind of works synergistically together. But here's the kicker here is if you're taking estrogen and you're taking testosterone and you're taking progesterone, well, number one, you're not fixing the problem. Because if your pregnenolone hormone, your mother hormone is significantly depleted, that kind of wrecks the whole system. And throw on top of that another factor is if you have a lot of either mental emotional stressors or even physical stresses in your body. So of course, mental emotional stress, you understand that that is. You probably have that in your life right now. But then you could have other inflammatory stressors, like maybe, as an example, maybe pathogens in your gut, maybe spike proteins in your body, maybe toxicity in your body. Perhaps you're eating foods you have food sensitivities to and you're unaware. But there's a lot of different things that drive this inflammatory stress as well. Well, what happens then is if you have a lot of mental emotional stress and then these inflammatory stressors, your body prioritizes the pregnenolone going down the pathway of cortisone and cortisol, which then ultimately creates a deficiency down the DHA pathway, which will then create a deficiency in testosterone and estrogen. Right. So I just want to give you a little bit of a quick overview so you understand how your hormonal system really works. Now, you'll notice though, there's another word on the bottom right of this particular picture. And there's a word it's referred to as aromatase. Aromatase, very simply, is an enzyme that will convert testosterone into estrogen. Now, this can happen whether you're producing testosterone naturally or if you happen to be like my client, taking weekly shots of testosterone. Yeah, so ultimately what happened with her is she's taking these weekly shots of testosterone and also taking creams of estradiol. And so the testosterone, so obviously this woman had a high level of aromatase in her body. So the weekly testosterone shots were just being converted into estrogen. Plus, she was using a patch of estradiol. And in her body's infinite wisdom, and this, and I mean that completely sincerely, in her infinite wisdom, her body was trying to remove the excess estrogen by naturally producing a significantly high amount of progesterone. Remember, she should have been about 650 and she was over 16,000. And this was a natural production, yeah, because the oral that she was taking, she wasn't taking enough orally to get her progesterone levels anywhere near that number. So it was really her own body doing this as a built-in way of trying to maintain the best balance she could. Yet in the end, she couldn't because she had two things fueling the elevated estradiol. She had the weekly testosterone shots with the aromatase converting it into estrogen, and she was actually using a cream of estradiol that was not necessarily getting in her blood, but then building up in her tissue as well. Yeah, so you can imagine that this woman who for a number of months was on weekly testosterone shots to be shocked that she had this dangerously low level of testosterone, and even more shocked to learn how high of an estrogen dominance she had and what those risk factors really were. And when I laid it out to her and explained to her how, the you're not going to have that high of a level of progesterone by the amount of oral progesterone you're taking, but it was her body's way of literally trying to save her life. Yeah. So what's interesting with this is in my practice, and again, I've been working with women with hormonal issues and menopause for over 21 years, and I've looked at over 8,000 test kits. And do you know how many times I've actually recommended testosterone to a woman in my clinic? Zero, zero times. And the reason for that is because I know what's likely going to happen with the testosterone. Now, if we take this a little bit deeper, in regard to the aromatase, remember the aromatase is the enzyme that's going to convert the testosterone into estrogen. Well, there are different supplements you could take that are aromatase inhibitors that will help deplete that. But I'll go a little bit deeper for this with you as well, is because nobody's producing aromatase because you have a deficiency of an aromatase inhibitor. You see, the reason why you could be producing a higher amount of aromatase is usually tied into having elevated insulin. Now, I know if you've heard of insulin and glucose before, usually you have a doctor telling you need to eat better and you need to exercise. And there's a good chance that you already do eat really well and you already do have and do exercise on a regular basis. But here's the kicker. You can eat really well. You can have a high level nutritional integrity and you can have a regular fitness routine throughout your week and still have elevated insulin. And that occurs when you're inflamed. To understand that when you're inflamed, inflammation itself will drive a production of fat cells. The higher amount of fat cells will drive then insulin resistance. The insulin resistance then drives insulin surges, and those insulin surges is going to be a significant factor in the production of that aromatase, which then is converting your testosterone and estrogen. But here's a kicker. The insulin surges don't just drive the production of the aromatase. The insulin surges also create more inflammation. You see, because obviously one of the primary symptoms that so many women have with menopause, and perhaps you do as well, is weight gain. And a lot of women think that, well, the weight that I'm gaining is really just, I'm just gaining more fat. Well, one of the things to understand is that when you're gaining weight, you're gaining inflammation typically along with fat. And there's two reasons why, as you enter menopause, that you would actually be gaining weight. And one is because you have something driving inflammation in your body. To look at that, I mean, there's other videos on my YouTube page underneath the Menopause Morning podcast that gets into all the different triggers of what could be driving inflammation for you. Yeah, but there's another aspect here that's driving this. And this was another one of the episodes as to it was earlier in this year where I did an episode on weight gain and menopause. Because the other reason why you would actually be gaining weight is because when that system that I showed you earlier, and here, let me pull this up once more, just because it's that important, is when we look at this. Okay. So when we go back to that picture and you see that, and remember, we're talking about weight gain here. So when you see that it's the pregnenolone, and here, I'm even going to bring it up a different picture, which will even be more helpful. Here we go, because this one is circling the problem. You see, because the problem with when you have menopause symptoms, number one, is not the low estrogen, it's not the low testosterone, it's not the low progesterone. The problem is that mother hormone, the pregnenolone and the DHA are so depleted that you can't convert the hormones down the pathway that you need to be in a perfect hormone balance. Right. So then when you think of it this way, when your pregnenolone and your DHA are deficient, and then you can't convert you don't have enough DHA to convert into testosterone and estrogen, well, then you're going to be low in estrogen. Your body doesn't want to be low in estrogen. Your body wants perfect estrogen levels, and it has the ability to achieve that, but not when your progesterone and your DHA are so low. And so what happens then is then your body will purposefully hold on to more fat because fat is another place where you're going to produce estrogen. Now, unfortunately, well, and not that and you don't want to gain fat on your body anyway, but even in gaining fat, let's say that you put on 20 pounds of fat during menopause, there's still not enough fat to really maintain the estrogen production that you should be achieving through your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenals, how they work synergistically together. Yeah. So ultimately, what ends up happening, and I see this time and time again in my office with women dealing with menopause, and really women just like you, where you just don't have the progesterone, or I'm sorry, you don't have the pregnenolone, you don't have the DHEA, so you can't supply the pathway of testosterone and estrogen. And because this whole system ends up getting blown out, now you're also low in progesterone. And what happens when you go to your doctor? You get put on estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. And with my example, you already know what that's going to probably turn out like. Yeah, and because the whole thing to understand is that if you have menopause symptoms, short of, the only two true symptoms of menopause is you stop having a monthly cycle and you can't conceive anymore. Those are really the only two true symptoms. All the other symptoms, the weight gain, hot flashes, the mood swings, the sleeplessness, the fatigue, the brain fog, the list goes on. Those are all systems of going through menopause with this system basically broken, where you don't have enough of your mother hormone, you don't have enough of the DHA. Nothing can go down the pathways that it needs to go on. And the reason why that's happening is because something triggered your hormonal dysfunction in the first place. And those triggers are something driving inflammation. So you can kind of see when you put the pieces of the puzzle of this all together, something's driving inflammation. The inflammation is basically it's really creating a significant hardship for your hormonal system. The inflammation is also driving then the fat cell production, the insulin resistance, the insulin surges. Now you're producing too much aromatase. And even if you're not taking, getting a weekly shot of testosterone or using testosterone cream or a patch of testosterone, even whatever estrogen, whatever testosterone your body is producing can still then be converted right into estrogen, leaving you still with no testosterone and potentially leading to a buildup and a dominance of estrogen. And then if you're wondering what happens when you're low in testosterone, well, that's pretty simple. The primary symptoms of low testosterone would be a lack of motivation, weight gain around the midsection, more difficulty building and maintaining muscle mass, and low feelings of intimacy and sex drive. And when I see women in my clinic that have low testosterone, I tell them what these symptoms are. They're like, check, 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 check. They have all those symptoms, right? And and the kicker here though is I want you to understand really the dangers of taking testosterone. And now I'm mentioning, because this is the menopause morning, so I'm mentioning how this is effective while you actually are in menopause, whether it be perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopausal. I still wouldn't recommend it if you were in childbearing years. And I'll be candid. I've seen plenty of men taking testosterone ending up with really high levels of estrogen as well. So the testosterone is something that makes logical sense, right? If you see a test result and it says your testosterone is low, it does make logical sense to take testosterone, but not once you know what's going to happen with it, not once you understand the potential dangers of it. And again, I see this all the time in my clinic. Yeah, so what I'd like you to do is just, whether if you have a pen and paper in front of you, write down, like when I mentioned the symptoms of low testosterone. So remember, that is lack of motivation, weight gain around the midsection, harder to build and maintain muscle mass, and then low feelings of intimacy and sex drive. So what I'd like you to do is write down for yourself if you're dealing with any of those symptoms. And if you are, let's say you write down all those symptoms, and I want you to circle the one that is the most like debilitating to you on a regular daily basis. And I want you to recognize what's going on. Just with the recognition that this isn't because you have low testosterone. It's really because you have low pregnenolone, low DHA, and you probably have something driving inflammation that's causing the production of the aromatase. Now, of course, if you have a really bad diet, high in, like if you eat sugar and drink soda all day and you sit on the couch, that you could have high glucose and insulin because of that. But I'll be candid. Like most of the women I work with, they do pretty well with nutrition and they do pretty well with their fitness. Yet they still have glucose and insulin levels like somebody who doesn't take care of themselves. And it's just because there's inflammatory conditions driving that. Yeah. And then the last thing I'll leave with you, well, what do you do about this? What if you are taking testosterone? Well, number one, do a comprehensive 24-hour urine collection and really understand what's going on. Remembering the difference. If you look at blood only shows you what's in the blood in the moment. When you do a 24-hour urine collection, you do this comprehensively, you're going to see buildup of hormones in your tissue as well. Like as an example, I've seen this many times where a woman will come into my clinic and based on her blood results, her estrogens are low, and then we get the 24-hour urine collection back, and her estrogens are off the chart because the estrogens that they're using, which is often creams or patches, they're not making it into the blood. But then the question you want to ask yourself, if you're taking a hormone via a cream or a patch and it's not showing up in your blood work, you have to ask yourself, where's it going? Well, where it's going is in your tissue. Yeah, so it's dangerous to build up estrogen in your tissue, as you probably can surmise based on everything I'm talking about here today. Yeah, so with this, what if you do nothing? What if you just let this keep going out of control? No, your symptoms get worse. Your chances of an estrogen dominance increase. If you get into estrogen dominance, you have a significant risk factor for breast cancer. Or what if you look at this at a different level? What if you do look at this with a 24-hour urine collection? You look at this comprehensively. You look at 32 different hormones. You look at inflammatory conditions, chronic disease risk factors. You look at the two levels at which your kidneys and also your liver are affecting all of this. And you get to the bottom, to the root of what's going on. You actually fix it naturally. Yeah, so that's the opportunity that you have. So that wraps up the dangers of testosterone with menopause today. And I will also say, wherever you find this video, whether it be on my Facebook business page, my regular Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you're going to see this, underneath, you're going to see also a link where you can get a free copy of the electronic version of my book that's called Fat, Fatigued, and Frustrated, which is an action step guide to really start changing your fundamentals, which is the key beginning of a shift hormonally for you. And when you get that free book, you will get on the Menopause Morning email list. So then when I do these on Tuesdays, I usually send out an email on Monday night reminding you of the Menopause Morning coming up the next day. And I give you the subject matter of that particular week. So that way you can see, hey, this is something I really want to learn more about. And then you jump on. And so it's just a great way for us to all stay connected. I'll be doing this again every Tuesday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. They will usually be live, except occasionally with, sometimes I'm traveling to do health education around the country, and occasionally they will be recorded. But wherever you're consuming this, if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the comments below, and I do address all these personally. So hopefully you've learned something from this today, and for some of you, this may have even saved your life, because if you have that risk factor for converting testosterone and estrogen, that could be a significant factor for you. All right, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.